And we are live. Amazing. Welcome, ladies and gents, to the 18th episode of Waking Warrior Podcast. I'm very honored to be doing this. I've got JJ. You prefer JJ, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Got JJ Hardy with me here. He specializes in leadership education and implementation. He has his own podcast, the Victory Leadership Coaching Podcast, right?
It's Victory
Yep.
Leaders Lounge. Yes.
Victory Leaders Lounge. Okay. And then he also has a coaching company called Victory Leadership Coaching.
Yes.
Amazing. Dude, welcome, man. Welcome. I'd love for you to start off by maybe at the beginning, like as a young man, what prompted you to want to join the Army? And let's take it off from there.
Sure. So, we were talking about it right before we aired, and, you talk about the different stages of people that have issues before the military, people that have issues from in the military, and people that start to have those major issues because of their transition. So before I joined the military, the main reason that I joined was because I needed to get the heck away from home. My parents were abusive. I ended up going down a path where I was around nothing but a bunch of people that, though they may have been very friendly, it was all drugs and violence and all of that stuff. I was going down. I know that looking back from where I'm at right now, if I wouldn't have left, if I wouldn't have done something, I would probably be in prison right now rather than has served a career in the military and had a successful life. I do have some combat time. I did a lot of convoy operations. Had a lot of friends who sustained injuries during those combat operations, mostly convoy, and had some stuff happen even on the FOB that I actually shared an experience with a person that I do a live stream with, where we had to do some triage operations over in Balad. If anybody who's ever served in the combat zone in Balad, they know about the tragic bombing of the DFAC. And I was walking to the DFAC. He was in the DFAC, but neither of us actually got hit by the bomb that hit the DFAC, but we did help with the after effect of it all. And so those types of stories happen frequently through the military. I'm able to talk about those things without crying now, but
you can cry if you want to. This is we're definitely encouraging that.
I have difficulty doing it. My buddy, the therapist, has told me that your first name is Jeremiah, just like in the Bible, man. You need to let the tears flow, just like Jeremiah did in the Bible. And
100%.
it's so difficult to get there. It's happened before, mostly through therapy. But after the military, that really hit me hard, even though I had been in therapy since before I transitioned. I left my family, and that was probably the most difficult thing. That was more difficult than the childhood trauma, the combat trauma, anything that I had ever dealt with. I lost faith in myself. I forgot who I was. And just thinking about, all the things that I could still be doing when my unit that I was with, when I retired, when they went down range, and, I started hearing from my friends, them asking me questions. I was still kind of in the mindset there to be able to answer their questions, but I felt like my train was leaving without me, if that makes any sense to you at all.
It does. I've had enough of these conversations and actually went through this myself 100%. Yeah, so it sounds like we have a hat trick. You've got some early childhood challenges, you've got some in-service challenges, and also transition challenges. So, I can just sharing a little bit personally, like I also had a very difficult childhood and wasn't physically abusive, but there were certainly some things that my father and I really disagreed on, especially when it came to religion. And so I left home as early as I could. I got a release form so I could join the United States Military Academy at 17.
Wow.
And so I get it. I also left home for very similar reasons. And actually, a good point of news is that after 14 years of not talking, my father and I actually had a no shit conversation 2 days ago.
Well,
So we're
congratulations.
starting. Thank you, man. It's been a lot of work and a lot of patience and a lot of prayer. But I'm happy to say that there is a door open for us to reestablish a relationship. So on the early childhood stuff, I'd love for you to go through that process, like running to the Army. to escape from a bad childhood. I mean, that sounds pretty traumatic in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we actually moved back after a couple about 2-3 years after I retired from the military. We moved back to Iowa, which is where I'm from. And there were many reasons why. One, I wanted my kids to be close to family. Not all of my family is verbally abusive and struggling in poverty and all that stuff, but my mother and my father most certainly were and are. My mother has since passed, actually, just like 3.5 weeks ago. But you know, I had to address those things with her, and you know, I had to actually come to terms with the fact that she will never, ever, ever own up to the things that happened when I was a child, and I came to that conclusion because I tried many different ways to approach that subject with her, and it would either end in, you know, what, I was a horrible mother, and then it would go down that rabbit hole, or you know, it would be, yeah, but you did this, or and then it went down that rabbit hole, and you know, I just kind of kept my opinions to myself at that point because I knew that no matter what I said, it wouldn't work. Similar things with my father. I was always the problem, even though at a very young age, at 15 years old, I started bouncing around from household to household. I went from living with my mom to a point where, you know, I fought back once and I ended up pushing her across the room, and she called my uncle, and he was going to, in his words, you know, take care of me. And there would have been nothing good that came out of that. I ran to my father's house. Well, I didn't know this because I had nothing but good experiences with him until this time. But living with him, both he and his spouse were even more abusive than my mom could have ever been, and they were into the very hard drugs. And you know, that was, I don't actually know what my dad's real character is because he's been involved in so many things throughout the years. I just know that he's not a very nice person. But yeah, when it comes, what's up?
I was going to say, sorry, I got my mouthful of Bombay. It's a medicine we use here down in Colombia, and it's meant
Nice.
to sweeten the words. It's like all the benefits of caffeine, but physically very good for the body. But I was going to say something, and then just a cloud of green smoke came out.
I saw that. I was like, man, you're having more fun than I am.
What is he doing? Yeah, it's on a side note, coca, which is what this is made out of, is a really wonderful plant, a really wonderful medicine. And so those of us that live in this area or have connections with the indigenous tribes, a lot of us use it. Anyway, I really resonate with what you said right there. The conversation that I had with my father was a difficult one a couple nights ago. And it was mostly like, you know, he was like, "You're the enemy." I was like, "I love you, Dad." He's like, "There's nothing that you can learn from me or that you can teach me. I love you, Dad." And just responding with love. And I think that it took me a long time to get to that point, but it sounds like that's what you did and are doing with your mother and your father. You know, responding with love and just like, "I'm here for you. I love you, and I'm going to support you." And what I actually said to my father was, I was like, "Thank you for giving me life, and thank you for protecting me when I didn't have the capabilities to do it myself." And so that sort of level of healing is really beautiful, and I resonate a lot with that.
Yeah. I mean, but you know, it kind of felt a different way about it though too, because when I was weak, I was definitely treated like I was weaker. And it's not right for a child to have to go through that. And I'll be honest with you, since I transitioned from the military, I feel like some of my both combat symptoms and my early childhood trauma symptoms have started coming out. And though I have not been physically abusive towards my children, I do feel like some of that has come out, and I start acting I don't act the same. I don't degrade them, but I do react poorly to a lot of things. And sometimes that comes out in a negative way. And I know that I'll say it's taken me a while to kind of calm down a little bit. And
Mm.
now I'm having to repair those relationships. And now that my son is almost 15 and he's got an attitude himself, that makes things a little bit interesting too.
Oh, that's so beautiful though that you can realize that. I mean, I think that that's for the reason for healing comes in a variety of different ways. Some people want to feel better or live their lives better. Other people want to not pass on the same patterns that they learned as a child to their children. And there's this thing that your therapist has probably talked a lot about, or the one that you work with is, generational trauma. And
Yep.
this was kind of the key element for why I was able to, like, it's not even that I have to forgive my father, it's that he doesn't have to ask for forgiveness in the first place. Because I understand where he was coming from was a very wounded individual, my mother as well, and they did the best they could. As maybe that, like, you can say that and like I can say that and I get it. Other people are like, oh no, that's horrible. Physical abuse is never, no, it's like they're wounded people, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get that. And I'm very proud of you for realizing that those patterns exist within yourself and that that's not something you want to pass on to your children. They're very lucky to have you as a father.
I don't want to pass that on to them. And the stuff that I have done, though I still have little hints of that here and there, that because you know how it is, sometimes you can't even catch it. It just comes out. And
it's the reaction. Yeah.
it's the reaction. And you have to realize it, catch it, walk away for a second, and then come back. And then, you're doing the repair. It's like I call it a repair ceremony where I have to do apologies, explain what happened, say I'm not really explaining. There's no excuse for my actions, but it is a real thing that this is the reason why I react this way. That sort of thing. And as an adult, that's not a conversation that you should be having with your kids. You got to be the bigger and better person. And as a leader, I feel like if I would do that same stuff when I was working at different places or when I was wearing the uniform in front of my soldiers, that would have made me a horrible example. But why in the house is it that
Maybe.
way? What's that?
Maybe. Like maybe, right? I think a lot of what I learned about leadership at West Point and then in my military service was that, and this kind of ties into a lot of what Brene Brown talks about. I think true strength comes through vulnerability. And so as an Army officer, I made a lot of mistakes and I would go up in front of my men and say, look, I fucked up, guys, I'm sorry. And this is what I did. And this is what I realized why I did that. And I'm not going to make that same mistake again. And for me, I believe that generated a lot of trust and a lot of like, okay, like, yeah, I mean, because we're human just like the rest of them, right?
Yep.
And so maybe you doing that with your kids is a powerful example of leadership. And that, like, yeah, I mean, leaders are out in front and they're leading by example, but we're not perfect. And
No.
having the humility and vulnerability to show that is not weakness in my book.
Yeah. And that does, you're right. And I do teach a lesson about how it's important to be vulnerable with people. And sometimes it's hard to see the power in that. And sometimes sometimes that's a really negative emotional thing that can turn into a positive thing too, when you're showing your emotions like that, but can come to the realization and apologize and explain the why and hope that there's some forgiveness that happens there. I could see that. But that doesn't
just
make it easy.
A perspective. No, it's certainly not easy, man. I think that's but that is, I think, for me, the true definition of leadership. Like, live your life. It's not like beating somebody over the head or like you're going to do this or do that. It's living your life in such a way that sets an example that other people want to follow.
Yes.
Like, hey, JJ, like, you always got a smile on your face and like you're doing all this great work. Like, how are you living your life and how can I be like that? And that's at least what resonates with me, like, as with everything, take it with a grain of salt. And if it resonates with you, amazing. If not, then disregard.
Disregard.
But yeah, it's definitely not easy. And I think it's such a tricky issue because it's so not easy that we want to come up with any excuse in the book as to why we wouldn't talk about our problems or why we wouldn't be vulnerable, because it makes us feel a certain way. And so I can imagine you as a kid coming into the Army, you're running away from one family and you're accepted into another. And so this, as a side note, and something I'm sure we'll talk about later, is kind of the problem when we transition, because we lose the family that we've been learning to rely on. So I had a very similar experience, right? I went into the Army, I was isolated and estranged from my family for the better part of, well, still continuing in some forms for 15 years now. So I get it. So when you got into the Army, what was that process like? And how did you start kind of processing those sort of things?
So first, it was hard. I showed up to my first duty station, and this was after training in the whole 9 yards. Obviously, that had its own different set of, I won't call them issues, but it was just a different experience. But when I got to my first unit, the first thing they said was, in 3 months, we're deploying to Iraq. And
Oh my
so,
God.
yeah, but it actually turned out okay. So I had some interesting stuff happen there. I did some convoy ops. I was a young PFC, about halfway through that deployment, and I was going on convoy ops. I was a saw gunner, so I was placed up in the turret a lot, and I got to see some interesting things and react to some interesting things, and all of that stuff. But with all that aside, what did start happening is the family aspect that you just got done talking about. There were people there that, good, bad, right, or wrong, they believed in me and they supported me even through the hard stuff. And I really didn't have that. It was like, my mom would smile at me one second and then she'd be beating the shit out of me the next. And then the same thing with my father. You never knew when he would fly off the handle and start and waylaying on me. And I didn't have that. When I was on active duty, I was rewarded for good things. I was corrected but nurtured through the negative things that I did. And when the bad stuff happened, that I thought that I was going to truly just lose my rank or whatever the case may be, they actually, they worked me through an improvement plan, and they told me, you're better than that and you can go on and do great things. The stuff that I really felt like I should have heard as a child, they just believed in me. And when it came time for that first leadership position, there was no question. They recommended me for E5. I went to the board. They had prepped me through all the Soldier of the Month boards and all that other stuff that people get to experience as a young enlisted guy. And I passed with flying colors because I had so much support. And it is hard for me to say that because I didn't have that growing up. But it's also easy and it's wonderful to say that because not everybody gets that supportive environment after they've had a childhood like that.
Yeah.
And it's very important. Now, you'll probably ask me about this later, but fast forward to when I had to transition, it was hard. I lost belief in myself. And actually my 35-year-old brother's death was what got me through that, and also some support groups through the DAV, because we all know how great the VA therapy system and group system is. It's just, I did not have a great experience with that.
Well, that's why we're doing this, brother. I think like as a side note, the inspiration and real prayer of what Waking Warrior is for me came. I've been working in the traditional plant medicine field here in Colombia for the last 4 years or so. So I got out of the Army and had a 10-year rough transition process myself, was deep into alcoholism, and I was functional but barely. And so I finally got my way down here to Colombia. I think this country called me, and I was surrounded by community and family and tribe and all the things that I was looking for. And I started taking plant medicines, most notably started off with ayahuasca myself. And now I've been doing in-person work with a lot of veterans and, holding them, like holding space for them, and also sometimes literally physically holding them while they're going through these sort of issues, crying their eyes out at 3 in the morning. And I realized that there are a lot of things that could be done by the government, by the VA, by this or that. And it is up to us, I think, as leaders to take responsibility for our own lives and that of our brothers and sisters. And if we're not getting the help that we need, and we're not, because it's evidenced by nearly 40 of us killing ourselves every day, because I'm not sure if you know this, the 22 number that the VA came out with doesn't include drug overdoses, which I would highly consider to be unintentional or intentional suicide. So that said, the real number is closer to 40. So that said, if we're not getting the help that we need, it's up to leaders like you and me to provide an example, to bring our community together, to get the people the help they need, and also to start passing that responsibility on to others so we can help ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. The community is what got me through it. I mentioned the DAV. Well, after I tried to go through the VA process, which we know is so wonderful, I joined the DAV. I met somebody who said that they go to these groups over there, and they weren't the first ones I tried. I tried joining an American Legion. That particular chapter,
A bunch of cranky old Vietnam vets, man.
yeah, I mean, they were good people, right? But everyone, it seemed like everybody, now pardon my language, but it seemed like everybody was walking there with their dick in their hand, trying to measure them with other people in the room. And I wasn't about that. Now, I'm not every American Legion is that way. It just depends on which one you go to, where you're at in the country, in the world, and all that stuff. But this particular chapter of the DAV in Virginia, they had a group there, and it just seemed like no matter what combat experience they had, what childhood experience they had, there was just no judgment whatsoever. People were all willing to go in there and share their story, and the rest of the people there were willing to hear it and provide support if it was wanted. And that there was an entire community that was built there because people would leave the room and actually put their money where their mouth was. And when you say the military people, it's our responsibility to make this happen and help other vets. Well, it's absolutely true because the government's not doing it.
Yeah, and we have two options. We can complain and point the finger and blame, or we can do something about it. And I think that that's something we learned in the military. It's like, look, I don't know who was originally tasked to take this fucking hill, but I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I think that's important, and also to provide a counterpoint. Because I talk to a lot of veterans as well that kind of throw up their hands like, oh, the VA is not helping me. The DAV wasn't this or that. Hey, man, take responsibility for your own life. It's okay. I did it. You can do it too. I'll walk with you.
Yep. But people have to make that decision to actually take action to make a change in their life. I mean, I work with people not work with people. I help people at all different stages. Me and my buddy, we have a group on Sunday nights, and we just talk. It's just veterans talking.
Oh, that's so great. It's a men's group.
Yes, it is. It's
amazing. I've been running men's circles for like 4 years here in Medellin.
But I've invited people in there, and most people leave, but some people stay. And the people that leave, they hear how people have gotten through it, and they don't want to hear that. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I just don't think they're at the stage where they want to accept that there can be a change yet. And that's a reality. People push away the positive because they don't see the possibilities in it. And if you embrace the positive,
or they don't want to, right? Well, sometimes we get addicted to our own suffering.
Yes.
Right. And it can come in a variety of different forms. Like you mentioned that when you left the Army, your transition process, you were thinking about your troops and the family that you were leaving behind. So there, I sort of detected like an element of survivor's guilt almost. Yes. And so sometimes I talk to a lot of veterans and they don't want to let that go because it's a way of connecting and remaining connected with the people. They're like, I'm unhappy, but at least I'm not as unhappy as the people I left behind. And there was this veteran that I talked to. So one of the medicine men that I train with, he serves ayahuasca, and I help him in his ceremonies. And he had a cousin of his that was a mail clerk in Afghanistan. Their Chinook got shot at. They had to land because they were delivering out to the FOBs. And they got locked in like a 2-day firefight. And from that firefight, he had a tremendous amount of PTSD. And he was sitting there for years, I don't want to take ayahuasca. I don't want to take this. Don't want to do this. And it took me 30 seconds to talk to him and convince him. I was like, hey, man, what effect is this having in your life? Well, I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I can't keep a relationship, yada, yada, the whole laundry list, right? All of us know this. I was like, okay, well, are you more afraid of your life sucking like that and continuing? Or do you want to try something that will help? He's like, oh, well, that's actually all I needed to hear. And sometimes that's all we need to hear. Sometimes that's it. Like, hey, man, do you want to keep suffering? Because if not, like, we've got some modalities that work, and no one can ever tell you this is how you can heal. You have to figure that out for yourself.
Yes.
There's a lot of different things to try, though. And so if you're suffering and you're not trying something, well, buddy, I got news for you. You got to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, that's what ends up resulting in that suicide number that you just got done talking about.
Exactly.
People when they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, or they don't want to see the light at the end of the tunnel, regardless of how that looks, it still ends up in the same place. It's a real thing that eventually a veteran is going to take action and fix whatever problem they have. Well, if they get so far down, that's when they take action the way that we don't want them to. We need to, whether it's me or it doesn't matter. I have a network of other veterans that I talk to. I mean, I try very hard to make sure I connect people with somebody that they would want to connect with, not just push them to join whatever groups that I'm a part of, because the more important thing is that they get the help. I don't care where you get it.
Exactly. Dude, that's it.
Do I have to walk you to the VA myself? Do I have to take you over to the church because you don't want to deal with the VA anymore? What is it going to take? Let's make this shit happen right now.
100%. And it's this idea is like, the longer you don't talk about it, the harder it gets to start.
Yes.
And so one of the things that we're taught in the military is, hey, suck it up. You're hurting, grab some ibuprofen and keep on marching. And if you have a security clearance, you can't go for professional counseling or help. Or I went into, because I needed some serious therapy, man. I just gotten injured. I was rear detachment XO for all the people that couldn't go to deploy to Afghanistan. I just watched my platoon board the plane and leave without me, which was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life. And meanwhile, we're going to like 2 or 3 memorial services every week for the soldiers that weren't making it back. And I was just in a bad place, man, disconnected from my family. I was like, I have to get out. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And there was this military family life consultant called Dr. Bill Winters. And the military at this point was trying to figure out, okay, how do we prevent the PTSD from happening? So they just hired a shit ton of therapists. And so this therapist was right next door to me. He said, hey, sir, I heard you joking. And there was a little bit of pain in that joke. What do you say we just sit down and talk for a little bit? So we ended up, no shit, man, 6 months, 2 or 3 hours a day talking with this man, free therapy.
Wow.
Now, it changed my life. Now he left and I had a couple months remaining in service. So I walked my ass down to the mental health department. And I said, hey, just finished a 6-month relationship with one of your wonderful military family life consultants. I was wondering if you had any other therapists that I could talk to. And the guy at the front desk goes, well, sir, are you planning on harming yourself or anyone else? I said, no. He's like, well, we can't help you then. I was like, what do you mean? That's not the point of therapy. The point of therapy is not to prevent me from murdering someone or killing myself. It's to help me to be a better person, and that's what I want. But they were unable to provide me help. And I think that is more than anything else, what is killing American veterans is that we have been told to not ask for help and to not communicate. Because if you communicate, if you ask for help, you will find it. And there are so many of our brothers and sisters that will rally around you and figure out what we need to do to get you the help. But it's these people suffering in silence. That's the 40 a day.
Yes. Well, and here's kind of one of my stories with the VA. So before my brother passed and I realized I had a life awakening, a moment there, I was seeking care at the VA in Virginia, and I was seeing this counselor there, and I had already submitted because I knew a couple other veteran buddies of mine that I guess I'll just go get SSDI. That's what other people are doing. I'm 100% disabled through the VA, so that must mean I'm 100% disabled, which is the dumbest thing I could have ever thought, because that means absolutely nothing. It just means that your percentage adds up because of all the shit that you've had happen to you. But when I went and applied for my SSDI, they had me go get my psychology notes.
Are you talking about SSRIs, like antidepressant?
No, like Social Security disability.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to do that. Thank God I didn't do it, because I wouldn't be able to have had the impact that I've had since I've started my business. But they needed my psychology notes from the VA. And so this is probably not true of all counselors, but the one that I was seeing at the VA, apparently they either misunderstood or they weren't listening. they put down that instead of riding my bicycle, which is what I did for exercise, they put down that I was riding a motorcycle, and I lost my disability claim because of that. Because they didn't properly take the notes. They said, well, if you're healthy enough to go out and ride a motorcycle, then there's no reason why you have any issues with your activities of daily living. And so we're going to deny this claim. Well, immediately I went over to her and she said, no, that's what you said. Then I said, I'm telling you, if you can look at my DMV records if you want to, I have never had a motorcycle license. And so I'm not saying that to harp on that one person, but if you don't provide the help that a veteran needs, they will turn their back on you in a second, especially if you're not another veteran. Yeah. If once you lose our trust, it's not just that person that disobeyed our trust, it's the institution. And so people will go further down the rabbit hole because of the VA, because they have these people that don't understand what's happening with us. I'm not saying that maybe that person has had positive benefits with somebody else, but all it takes is one. And we won't seek help anymore.
Yeah.
That's why we need to be looking for these people, looking for those signs that military family life counselor saw in you, which was just a simple comment that you made.
Yeah, it was a joke.
Yes, but
like,
it was.
Oh, hold on. We need to do. Yeah, it was my expression of pain through humor, and I find that example to be a great encouragement in the work that I'm doing and you're doing as well.
Yeah, we just need to make sure that when we meet these veterans and we're talking to them, we pay attention to the small cues that, if you're truly paying attention and you understand the symptoms of when somebody is down and out, that you stop the conversation and ask the hard questions. They taught you that when you were in the military.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, I have the dog tag right here that says what you're supposed to do. But you ask the question, ASK, right? You ask the question, oh, this is my warrior ethos one. Never mind. But you basically, it goes through the steps of making sure you get people to the help that they need. You never leave their side. You ask the hard questions, and you make sure that if they admit that they're suicidal, if they admit that they have PTSD but they haven't gotten help, if they admit that there's a small problem, you do something about it. It's our social responsibility, not just as veterans, but as human beings.
Agreed. Yeah. If everybody, I fully believe that our birthright is to live healthily and happily and well. And if we're not living that for whatever reason, then okay, let's help those people 100%.
Yes.
So with the Army, outside of the DFAC explosion, were there other difficult things that you went through that produced challenges in your personal life?
Yeah. So there was a lot of, and I'm sure I don't want to minimize what I'm thinking, but people
that you caught that.
Well, I do it all the time, because people do go through worse things than I've gone through, but that doesn't mean it didn't affect me in some sort of way. I gotta stop doing that. That's something that I still have problems with. But when you are dealing with trauma, people with almost severed limbs and different things, and you have a mass event where you are helping seal people up and load them up into the back of an FLA or a pickup truck or whatever is nearby so that we can get them over to that trauma center, even if it's on base. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's on the fob or off the fob. It's still a significant emotional event. And, those things are what I remember. I mean, I also worked on base my third deployment in it was over by BIOP. It was FOB sites, but we ran a convoy staging lot, and it was all third country nationals driving in and out of there. And there was a bunch of stuff that was happening there too. For some reason, the mortars like to hit in that lot. I don't know why they never moved the lot, but they didn't move the lot. And there were a few times where we were in there where we had trauma situations happen too. And that stuff doesn't leave. I mean, the look, the smell,
I'm,
everything.
yeah. I was going to throw in I immediately regretted it, but now since I stopped you, I have to say it. I'm guessing they attacked a lot.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry for the dad joke, man. I cover up sometimes uncomfortable situations with humor. That was totally not the wrong. That was totally the wrong guy to do it.
I laugh things off too. That's how I cope. As a matter of fact, sometimes
Same.
it's an internal way of redirecting a negative into a positive. I was an
Yes.
MRT instructor. I learned how to reframe, and I kind of, instead of dealing with my problems, I reframed and kind of stuffed them all down, which is why when I transitioned, I probably reacted the way I did for a couple of years.
That stuff always comes out. If you compartmentalize it, it comes out when you don't expect it and targeted towards the people you don't want it to be targeted towards.
Yes. Thank goodness I was never abusive towards my children, because I can see that could have gone any number of ways, and I'm not a small guy. And so that could have been a bad thing. And God is good. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, he took care of me. He took care of my wife and kids, and then they put up with it, and they're still here. So he's even better.
Yeah. And so why did you get out of the Army? Because you served, 18 years and change?
17 years, 11 months, and 1 day. So they gave me the option, because I was a CW2, to participate, which was still going on at the time, that Temporary Early Retirement Act. And so I got that. And then when I finished off and I was done with my retirement, I went through and did the VA thing and got my 100%. But otherwise, it would have just been a straight med board, which means I would have gotten absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that was the choice they gave me as well. It was either you medically retire and you get a percentage, or we're going to reclass you and you'll get kicked out in a year with nothing.
Yeah. I hate that they do that. But
yeah.
At least they gave me options. And I felt fortunate at that time, just because I looked around at some of the other soldiers I was transitioning with, going through the TAP program, and especially when I went down to advocate for myself at Fort Lewis, at one of those med board meetings. I wasn't the only one there. There were people there that they were really getting the shaft. They had the 20%, just like I did. And yeah, thank goodness they didn't make me finish going through with that. They're like, Chief, we'll just go ahead and let you participate in this act. I filled out my paperwork. 3 months later, I was retired. But these guys were getting nothing. They were getting completely shafted. These were combat veterans that they had been through the ringer. And because of some semantics, some small bureaucratic clerical mistakes that were on their evaluations of the award they were given when they went through that combat situation, they weren't given more of a rating. Their VA rating was significant, but their service rating was very small. And as a result of that, they were missing out on the TRICARE and access to the bases and all that other stuff that you get when you medically retire. And it was just, who's there to advocate for them? Great. I'm a CW2. I'm a senior leader in the military, but who advocates for those guys?
Yeah.
If
wow.
that makes any sense to you.
No, that's another problem. Hopefully we can tackle when we're approaching this in community. So you get out, and what was kind of your initial game plan on getting out? And so how many kids do you have? You have your son?
2. My daughter is 17. She's getting ready to go into her senior year of high school. My son is 14. He's almost 15. He's getting ready to go into his first year of high school. And when
what was the game plan then with you and the family?
Well, I was going to start a business as a freight broker, and I did that for a little while. But we were called over so my wife's mother called us, and she was having issues with her husband, my wife's father. And that's why we went to Virginia first, because he had dementia and diabetes, and she needed some support because she hadn't retired from her civil service job yet, and she couldn't do both. because he was getting lost and calling her at work because he couldn't figure out where he was, and he was taking the vehicle when he wasn't supposed to, and all kinds of stuff. And so we went over there and helped with that. He has also since passed, which is one of the reasons we left Virginia. He turned out to be one of my best friends, actually, which turned out, yeah, horribly. But it, everything happens for a reason. But that was our game plan, was to go over there and do that. And, I had my 100% rating from the VA shortly thereafter. So I was collecting that with my back pay all the way till I got out. And so with that money, we were actually living pretty well because we were there helping, and that was a full-time job. And I did actually, to make money, what I was doing is I was taking the pickup we had, driving around town, grabbing stuff off the curb, and then putting it up on Facebook Marketplace to sell it. Sometimes doing a little bit of refurbishing to it to make it look better. That's actually a lot of fun.
Nice.
And it pays well.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a good combination. Well, what was that process like for you? I mean, I'm assuming you had already mentioned you had kind of lost yourself.
Yes.
When did that happen?
That was right away. So the driving around, finding stuff, refurbishing things, I wasn't actually having any contact with the outside world except for a couple of people. Around home, I was getting severe dizzy reactions, and I fell down the stairs a couple of times because I was so dizzy. It was all because of isolation. I come to find out later. It wasn't real vertigo. It was my blood pressure was raising for no reason, and I was killing myself with isolation is really what was happening. And I talked to Bob every day. That was fine, but I really, except for when I took those drives every few days to go and grab stuff and bring it back to the house and work on it, I never left.
Sounds like depression almost.
It was depression. Yep. And honestly, I after my brother passed, there was a few months where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get a job, and I'm gonna be active in society, and it's gonna be great, and the whole 9 yards. And then that bred a whole new set of problems because nobody understands a veteran's experience. And I didn't understand that, and this is a big problem. People don't understand how to network on social media and stuff like that. It's a crucial part of transitioning that they miss in the transition program. They should be having people do that months and months and months before they transition, because you can't really get a job unless you're referred to a job. And then when you go in for these interviews, they don't really teach you how to speak civilian so that you can translate your experience to something that would relate to the business world. And I had to learn that sort of on my own, but then I got real close to one of my family members. She's my aunt. She lives in Tennessee, and she I will just say she dumbed it down for me. And that really helped me with my interviews and stuff like that. It took me about 9 months to get my first job that I was willing to take, because I felt like there was a certain amount that I deserved to get paid. I didn't really feel like $35,000 a year was going to pay me what I was worth, which, knowing what I know now, that's right and it's wrong. You got to kind of start somewhere and build a resume. But, it's interesting. You go doing all these great things. You serve on worldwide deployments. You go to planning conferences with foreign leaders and plan training exercises, joint training exercises, and you do all of these great things. And then you get out and you're like a nobody.
Yeah.
You're a nobody.
That's rough, man.
It is. So that bred a new set of problems, but I wish they would address these things during the transition program, have somebody that went through it, not some retired first sergeant that took that job to train the TAP program while he was still on active duty, and then just one day changed from his ACUs over to a polo.
Poorly fitting khakis and polo. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, man, what what pulled you out of that? Like, what was the driving force that either made you realize you had to change or that did change?
Something had to be done. The situation that we were in over there, it's not easy to live with other people when you've been independent for your whole life. My wife and I were having more and more conversations about it, and it was weird. One day I just woke up and said, I just got to put my big boy pants on and figure this shit out. And so I did. And within a couple of months after that, I had a job that only paid $55,000 a year, and I only stayed there for 3 months. But we got it figured out. And I had another job within a couple of weeks after that. And things just slowly started getting better and better and better and better. And it was because I redeveloped that mentality that I already had. When you fail, you figure out what you did wrong, make a course correction, and tackle it again. When that doesn't work, you rinse and repeat, and you do it over and over and over again. It's the MDMP process, but you don't have a group of people to discuss it with. You got to do it by yourself.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you took like radical accountability and ownership of your life. You're like, I'm going to have to do this myself.
Yes. And actually so for my business, the I'm in the process now. I just got done developing my keynote. It's exactly that. It's the whole story that we just got done talking, but it's a little bit more polished. But I'm going to be going to high schools, and I'm going to talk to seniors. I need this story to get out, because I feel like if people from poverty who are dealing with the same abuse, the same financial situation, the same everything, if they hear this story, they're not going to have to struggle the same way I did. So these people deserve to know that, there's a hand out there to pull them out of the hole. They don't have to sit there and take that shit forever.
Yeah. That's a powerful story, brother. You've really been through a lot, man, but you've like, I definitely detect a lot of taking accountability. I also heard you mention, prayer once and faith. Would it be correct to assume you're a Christian?
I am a Christian. Yes. As a matter of
What
fact,
role did
I have, and when I need inspiration, I don't even look at the glossary. I just open it up and I read until I find a word of inspiration, and it works every single time.
Nice. What role did your faith, or I guess maybe going to church or the religion aspect, have in your healing process?
Well, I started praying a lot more. I honestly, I lost track of that at some point, and I think it was in the military. I got too busy, and I stopped going to church. And then when I transitioned, I didn't have my faith to fall back on. Well, my wife's father, the one we were there taking care of, he was an avid Christian, and about a year and a half after us moving there, he really started saying, what, you need to have more faith. And then he's like, you know what, how about every day? And this may sound ooey gooey to the audience, maybe, I don't know, but he said, we're just going to sit here and hold hands, and we're going to pray together every morning while we're drinking coffee. And we did. We called it man time, but we were holding hands together singing Kumbaya.
I actually really love that. I mean, for the record, I think that's a wonderful thing. Physical touch and connection is something that we don't get enough of, either as men in our society or veterans, or really just in our society in general. Like, physical touch, especially among men, is not encouraged. And that's something that really needs to happen, because it's so fundamental to our well-being.
Whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Showing your emotions, being vulnerable, allowing other people to understand that you're more than just a combat veteran. You're a person who's in pain. It does a lot. And you're not just doing it for them to understand you. You're doing it for them to understand other people who are in pain, and allowing them to get close to somebody who has been through some struggle. it's important for them. You got it's a part of educating the masses, because in order to fix a problem, it's usually there's advocacy, which can turn into all kinds of negative stuff if you don't do it right. But the education is also very important. So letting people have that clear understanding of what causes the pain, and that you're just another person like everybody else, is a part of it too.
100% agree. So you did some jobs after the Army. You kind of started healing from that kind of lost place. You kind of got back on track, and now you're building your own coaching company.
Yeah. I took about 8 months to really figure out what that looked like, what that needed to look like. I saw a gap while I was working in these civilian companies, that, managers, oftentimes those young managers are somebody who did a really, really, really good job on the line, or stocking shelves, or driving the truck, or digging holes, or whatever the case may be. And so they're like, man, this guy has never failed us before, so we're going to promote him to be a manager. Yeah. But they don't give,
Nice.
they give them the team, and they say, they give them the
Figure it out.
it's almost like the middle finger salute. Have a good day.
Yeah.
And they leave them to go, hopefully fail forward. But usually it ends up giving these guys a bad name, because they have absolutely no idea what to do. So the company that I have now, the thing I specialize in is that new manager training. I created a course for it, and I think it's an important gap to fill, and I'm going to work my ass off to try to do it. But right now, until I get to the point where I have gotten enough visibility to get hired by more people, I'm just doing advocacy. So I do a podcast, my Victory Leaders Lounge. I have Warrior Leadership, which is a live stream that I do every Wednesday with Derek. We talk about bridging leadership coaching and therapy, and how that relate, and how that type of mentality and methodology can help the workplaces everywhere. And then on every other Friday, I have a friend named Chris. We do a live stream on, it's just more leadership stuff, but he's a leadership coach too, and he knows a lot of military people, but doesn't have a military background himself.
I'd love to hear you talk more about the connection between therapy and leadership, because you mentioned this before we had started recording as well.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go right into it. One thing that I did in the military, right before I became a warrant officer, was I taught the Master Resiliency Program for the Army. And I did that off and on because my job was first. I did it off and on for about 3 years. And I taught thousands of people. But what it focuses on, and I didn't know this until I met Derek, because I shared a little bit of the curriculum with him, is it teaches cognitive behavioral coaching.
Yep.
And it teaches that to other service members so that they can strengthen the ranks and help people cope with their problems. And so that's really the bridge. There's coaching, right? But that whole program kind of creates it. It's a resiliency program. So when you teach leadership is how to be strong within yourself for the betterment of others, to give yourself to others. And the therapy part of it is teaching that leader how to be a better person for his people by understanding their flaws.
And being open and sharing them, which kind of comes back to the whole vulnerability thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's powerful, man. I'm so glad you're doing that.
Oh, well, I feel like it was God calling me to do something very specific. It did take me 8 months to figure out what that thing would be. But now that I got there, I wrote a little book, Why Organizations Should Develop Their Leaders. It's a little pocket guide. And
Nice.
I created a self-paced program that I teach in cohorts that addresses all of these things. It gives that first level of leadership training with some coaching during the training for implementation into whatever you're doing at that point. And then I have just the one-on-one coaching program to help people with whatever challenges they're facing.
That's all right, man. I got a little puppy at my feet as well too. And so dog barks are allowed and encouraged. You're still muted.
Sorry, they were still barking.
No worries, man. All good.
They're still barking.
That's all right. That's all right. All good. Well, I'm really glad you're doing that, man. And I also wanted to kind of mention, I think a lot of things, something that I'm constantly facing in people that are transitioning is this like self-judgment as to how quickly things should happen. One thing that I think that they don't teach in the TAP program is the idea that you really have to find and establish your own identity and purpose and mission. And finding that when you get out of the army is maybe the most important thing to do, because it sort of supersedes, like if you get into the wrong job for you, one that you hate, it's not going to go well for you. And that is a process that takes time. You know, it's this idea of like having patience with yourself. If it takes 8 months or 8 years, it's going to be okay.
You're right. You know, and just like we would require of our troops in the military, you know, giving them permission to fail so that they could learn, they need to teach us what is necessary to be successful out in the civilian workforce, while letting us know that, you know, it's a landscape that we have never experienced unless we had some experience with that before we went into the military, and that it's okay to not be great at it at first. And you know what helped me a lot, like I said earlier, was understanding that I had to start somewhere. I couldn't start off necessarily at the same level that I was at first, but I had to start somewhere, and just getting in the door allowed me to open more doors for myself.
I love that, man. Anything that's on your heart to share with veterans that may be thinking about transitioning or already have transitioned or that might be going through a difficult time?
Yes, get on LinkedIn and start now. If you're still on active duty, as a veteran, you get a free account anyway, and you get a free premium account, I think, for the first year that you have it. Go on there and request your 100 contacts per week in whatever industry you want to go into, and just have as many conversations that are uncomfortable as hell as you can possibly have, so that when that transition happens, you either already have your next position lined up for you, or you're working on it. And from a mental health standpoint, that means that you don't have to have downtime to get in your own head. Your head is the worst place to live. Get out of your head and stay in the game, because when you lose the game, it's harder to get it back than it is to just stay in it.
Very much agreed, brother. Dude, what a great story you have, man. Thanks for sharing that and for being open about the childhood challenges and the things that you faced in the military and your transition, and being, open to share about the depression and the losing of oneself and also how you recovered from it. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful story to share, brother. Any last notes before I end this here?
Just that I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you for having me on your show. I mean, this is your lane and it's your mission, and hopefully anything that I have said will support that mission and provide value.
Dude, I appreciate that so much, man. Thanks for helping me get the word out and bringing our people into healing. All right, man. I'm gonna stop the recording and we can catch up afterwards, brother. All right, and with that, we're done with number 18.